everyone, welcome back to another video. Over the last 12 months or so, I've been gradually working my way through the classic Phantasy Star JRPGs, as someone who started the franchise with PSO. If you want to see my impressions of the first 3 games in the series, I do have videos on them already on my channel, so feel free to go and check those out. Now, for the majority of my journey through those classic games, I'd heard constantly in my chat and online as well about how great the 4th game was, so I was really excited to finally experience it. Up to this point, I would say that Phantasy Star II would probably be my favourite game of the classic RPGs, even despite some of its flaws. Would Phantasy Star IV really be as good as people made it out to be? Just before we go ahead though, I just want to say that this video will contain major story spoilers for Phantasy Star IV. I would strongly recommend playing through the game first if you are at all interested before going ahead with this video. So first, some background. For those who aren't aware, the 3rd Phantasy Star game, which was Phantasy Star III Generations of Doom, was largely developed by a completely different team to the first 2 games. Now, while important figures like Reiko Kodama did have some input into the 3rd game, it was nowhere near the level of the earlier titles. With Phantasy Star IV, Reiko Kodama actually moved into the director's role for the game, along with Toru Yoshida and Hiyoshi Takeuchi. Yoshida also supplied a lot of the artwork for that game as well. Now, the game's soundtrack was composed by Ippo and Masaki Nakagaki. So Phantasy Star IV released in Japan in December 1993, while the US and European releases, from what I could see, didn't arrive until around 1995, and it was for the SEGA Mega Drive/Genesis. The game used a higher capacity cartridge, and it retailed for almost $100 at the time in America. Now, I have heard several reasons why the game was priced so highly, with one commonly quoted source saying that SEGA of America actually didn't want to release the game originally, they actually rejected it. And they eventually priced the game so highly to try and dissuade customers from buying it. Now, whether this was because they wanted to refocus their sales on other genres of game, I'm not sure, but thankfully, after all that, Phantasy Star IV was still a success. So let's just quickly touch on the name actually. Now, if you look at images of the Western box art for the game is usually written as Phantasy Star IV. But when you actually load the game up, the title screen shows Phantasy Star: The End of the Millennium. Now, interestingly, on the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive Classics collection, they actually combine both titles in the menu to Phantasy Star IV: The End of the Millennium. Exactly why there is that difference isn't totally clear, but it is just worth mentioning. So if you see Phantasy Star IV or Phantasy Star: The End of the Millennium, they are the same game. So onto the game itself then. So Phantasy Star IV is the 4th entry in the classic Phantasy Star JRPG series, but it's actually the 3rd game chronologically, taking place around 1000 years after the events of Phantasy Star II. 1990's Phantasy Star III actually takes place significantly later than the events of the 4th game. However, Phantasy Star III doesn't take place in the Algol system and instead takes place far beyond that, while 4 does take place in Algol. So, easy way to remember it is Phantasy Star 1, 2 and 4 are all in the same solar system, Phantasy Star 3 is somewhere else. Now, in Phantasy Star 4, you play as Chaz Ashley, who is a 16-year-old rookie hunter based on the planet Motavia. As a hunter, you take on jobs for the various townspeople, whether that be slaying monsters, finding missing people, and various other things. At the start of the game, you'll be tasked with investigating a monster outbreak at the Motavia Academy. Accompanying you is your mentor, a woman called Alice Brangman, who is a renowned hunter herself. As you investigate the outbreak, you'll start to uncover a story of intrigue and hidden secrets, and the scope of the peril facing the Algol system will get wider and wider. Now, obviously, every good JRPG needs a good battle system, and Phantasy Star IV more than delivers in that regard. So the battle system in Phantasy Star IV feels a bit more similar to Phantasy Star II than Phantasy Star III, but it does away with Phantasy Star II's auto-attacking. Instead, you can either manually issue commands or you can use macros. Macros are a way to automate a turn by using set inputs that you decide by setting commands outside of battle. So while that in itself is a neat idea, it does go so much deeper than that. So Phantasy Star IV actually features a fully functional combo system that allows you to combine certain techniques and skills to perform huge combination attacks. For example, if one character uses the fire technique Fui, and another character uses the skill Hewn, providing those skills go together in the turn order, they will combine into the skill Firestorm, which will hit all enemies for fire damage. There are, as far as I'm aware, I think there are 14 different combinations. I believe there is a thing where the box art technically says there's 15, but one of them is a non-functional one. So, and I think you can only activate the 15th one through cheating anyway. So for all intents and purposes, there are 14 different combinations, some of which require specific characters to use, and they're just really interesting. They really add to the complexity of the combat. Now, some of the combos, particularly the later ones, are just insane, doing things like instant death on all enemies, or, for example, combining all of the most powerful skills in the entire game into one huge explosion. That is as good as it sounds. It's a fascinating system to use, and it definitely has some quirks to it, but it really does add to the depth of the combat overall, particularly after coming from a game like Phantasy Star IV, where it felt I could just auto-attack through the entire game. Just like Phantasy Star II, there is also items that can be used in battle as well. For example, the melee dagger will cast Nafoi if you use it in battle, or the power shield will use Shifter. There is also one very important plot-relevant item that will be very familiar to PSO players that also has it in use, in battle use as well. Now, what helps the battle system work even better is the wide variety of characters. These characters during the course of the game will cycle in and out of availability for your party, but almost every character has their own defined strengths and weaknesses, and their own set playstyle. Chaz, for instance, is your kind of stereotypical JRPG main. You know, he hits things very hard with a sword, but he also has good attack techniques, he has reasonable support techniques like heals. Then you've got characters like Rika. So Rika is super agile, she will typically move before most monsters. She attacks with claws, but she's also a great backup healer and buffer. Then you've got characters like Raja the Priest, who is very slow, but has probably the strongest heals in the entire game, and also has the unique ability to be able to restore TP to your party members, which nothing else can do in the game. So it's really interesting because it does give each of the characters their own kind of unique methods to use them. There is never really a point in the game where I felt like character was completely useless. So it is a really nice system because it means that you don't feel punished for using certain characters for the most part. So if the combat in Phantasy Star III was a bit of a letdown, then Phantasy Star IV's combat more than makes up for it. It is absolutely fantastic and definitely one of the strengths of the game. So next, since we talked about the characters a little, let's actually discuss the story a little bit and some of the character interactions in the game. Now, one weakness that I felt that a lot of the previous Phantasy Star games shared was a kind of lack of character development or notable story segments. Now sure, scenes like Near's death in Phantasy Star II did have an impact, but to be honest, the first three games just don't really have that much character interaction between your party members. You'll get the odd scene here and there, but there's really not a whole lot to it. Thankfully, Phantasy Star IV completely changes that. Whether that's because the higher cartridge capacity, I'm not sure, but there is a lot more dialogue between your characters in this game. Not only do characters talk to each other much more regularly, you also get moments of genuine character development, with Chaz being very notable for this. Now, once you solve the case at Motavia Academy, you eventually realise that the villagers in the area are being razed to the ground. For example, the Motavian Grizz, his entire village and family are killed, and it all turns out that it's by this magician that has appeared called Zio. There is also people joining cults to worship him, and things are getting pretty crazy in Motavia. Everyone is starting to follow this Zio guy, and no one really knows what his ultimate motive is. Now, as you discover the depths of depravity that Zio is willing to go to, you eventually reach a point in the story where it becomes clear that you need to stop him. So with that, Chaz and his party set out to confront Zio. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but again, this is major spoilers for the story here, so please stop watching now if you haven't played the game and you're interested in the story. So, the first time that you encounter Zio, you will very quickly realise that he's far beyond your strength. Zio will attempt to kill you, you basically get an unwinnable boss fight, and he'll attempt to kill all of your party. As he does so, in the commotion, Alice gets impaled. Now, while I knew that Phantasy Star doesn't shy away from scenes like this, obviously we had Near's death in Phantasy Star II, it still genuinely shocked me. Alice is taken back to her bed to recover, with the Scholar Harm looking after her. While Alice is recovering, you regroup and try to figure out a strategy to defeat Zio. And in the Ladia Tower, you run into the Mage Rune, who you have met briefly a little bit earlier in the game, but he does leave you quite quickly. Rune explains that Zio has a special magic barrier that you can't penetrate through, and you need to disable it using the relic that's housed in the Ladea Tower, which is the Psycho Wand. Remember when I said there was a very important plot-relevant item from PSO players? After eventually getting the Psycho Wand, you quickly head back to check on Alice. I was not ready for this, man. I really wasn't. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of expected that Alice would be out of action for a while, but then would return triumphantly to get her revenge on Zio. What actually happened couldn't be further from the truth. While you were gone, Alice's condition deteriorates rapidly, and she actually ends up passing away from her injuries. I seriously don't think I've had a main character death that hit this hard. Throughout the early stages of the game, Alice was kind of your rock that Chaz could rely on. She was so involved with the story that she was almost a joint main character with Chaz, and for her to die so suddenly and violently was a massive gut punch, and it was genuinely upsetting. I think if I wasn't streaming the game at the time, I probably would have cried at this point because it was such an impactful scene. The only other game I can think of that has had this kind of emotional impact on me was probably something like Nier Automata. So to experience this from a Mega Drive game really shook me. There's a really sad scene as well of the party trying to come to terms with Alice's death, with Rika and Chaz taking it particularly hard. It's an absolutely heartbreaking scene, and even then I was kind of waiting for Alice to suddenly wake up and for everything to be okay. And it's only when you see your party paying their respects at Alice's grave that you realise, no, Alice is actually dead. So what follows then is probably one of the best JRPG moments I've ever had, which is the revenge fight against Zio. With the power of the Psycho Wand making Zio's barrier useless, the tables are turned on him. And this is where I think the soundtrack of Phantasy Star IV really does a lot of heavy lifting. So the Zio boss fight theme, which is called Laughter, is filled with pent-up aggression, but it's also the kind of song where you can distinctly sense your party's mourning as you listen to it. It sounds like a very sad song despite it being called Laughter. I believe it's probably one of my favourite boss fights in a JRPG, not so much for the difficulty because although Zio is relatively difficult, there are some harder fights in the game, but just for how important it feels. You have to kill Zio here before he has a chance to ruin more lives. I think the crazy thing is that Zio is hyped up so much that you'll be forgiven for thinking he's the final boss. In fact, all along Zio has been using the power of the series staple villain Dark Force. Throughout the game, you'll actually run into several iterations of Dark Force, each feeling like a genuine final boss contender. Now, we did touch on the music briefly, but I do want to highlight a few favourite tracks outside of Laughter. I think Laughter is probably my favourite song on the soundtrack overall. Now, while Phantasy Star IV does feature a lot of hopelessness and despair in its story, there are also moments of lightheartedness and comedy. So when you visit the Motavian town of Tonoe for the first time, you're treated to the song Tonoe de Pon, which has a dog barking in it for some reason. And on the flip side, one of the saddest songs in the game is definitely Her Last Breath, which is the song that plays during the Alice death scenes. The emotion in the song is so raw and it really does fit the situation perfectly. think rounding out my favourite themes is probably Ooze, which is the theme of the actual final boss. If you've played PSO 2, I'm sure you'll recognise it. I certainly did. It is from the same boss after all, but it really ramps up the tension for what becomes a fight, not just to save individuals, but to save the entire solar system. Now, at this point, I could just go on and on about how good Phantasy Star IV is. I say this with no hesitation whatsoever. Phantasy Star IV is one of the greatest RPGs ever made, and might have even picked PSO to my favourite Phantasy Star game. The entire experience from beginning to end was absolutely incredible. I'm so glad I got to experience it. If you want to play it yourself, definitely play Phantasy Star and Phantasy Star II first, as a lot of the events in 4 will be much more impactful if you do. While there is small references to 3 here and there, I don't think 3 is as important to play beforehand. Now, unfortunately, the game is pretty difficult to play at the moment, so the SEGA Genesis and Mega Drive collection were delisted from all storefronts a while back. That is the way I played the game. I'd already bought the game before it got delisted. You may be able to play it through Switch Online. I think I've heard that apparently it's playable on Switch, but other than that, there is not many options left to play Phantasy Star IV. SEGA, please, please, please re-release the classic Phantasy Star games. They're a part of your history with the franchise, and I feel that Phantasy Star IV in particular is a game that deserves playing even in 2025. Now, in closing, I have really loved my journey through the classic Phantasy Star games, but Phantasy Star IV was the perfect closing entry. It very much stands the test of time, and it's probably one of the most enjoyable JRPGs. In fact, no, it's probably one of the most enjoyable gaming experiences I've ever had. If you get a chance, please pick it up and give it a try for yourself. It is such a good game. Now, with Ryoko Kodama's passing in 2022, I feel that her work deserves to remain playable, so that her legacy with the Phantasy Star series can be enjoyed for generations to come. Playing the classic Phantasy Star games, and especially Phantasy Star IV, is something I've been meaning to do for years, but I'm so glad I finally got a chance to experience them all. So just thank you for everything, Phantasy Star. So I think I'll close this video there. It's been really interesting going through these classic games, and I will probably revisit them again in the future. 4 was definitely my favourite of the entries, but I think all of them do stand up reasonably okay, maybe with the exception of 3. I do want to go on now and check out all the little side stories and everything, all the little miscellaneous games that I haven't got around to. So it has kind of led to a bit of a rabbit hole, honestly, which I'm more than happy to go in. So if you have enjoyed this video, please consider either liking, subscribing, or joining as a member on YouTube if you want to. You can also follow us up on my Twitch channel. I have X and Bluesky that are both SectionSkyly, and you can also join my Discord channel as well. So again, really recommend trying Phantasy Star IV if you haven't already. Please go and check it out, and any of the early games as well. Just please go and play them. So whatever you're doing, have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next video.